People think betrayal sounds loud. Screaming, crying, doors slamming, dishes breaking against the kitchen floor. But the worst kind of betrayal is silent. It's standing alone in your bedroom at almost midnight, holding your husband's phone while your best friend sends him another message. It's opening that chat by accident and suddenly finding over 2,000 messages, secret photos, hotel reservations, and voice notes that prove the two people you trusted most have been lying to you for nearly a year. And the terrifying part? Your whole world doesn't explode immediately. It goes completely quiet. My name is Laura Haynes. I was 36 years old, married for 11 years to a man I trusted more than myself, and best friends with a woman I considered family. I believed my marriage was solid. I believed loyalty meant something. Then one Wednesday night, while my husband Daniel was in the shower, his phone buzzed 3 times beside me on the nightstand. I glanced down and saw my best friend Christy's name glowing on the screen with a message I wish I had never read. My hands started shaking before I even unlocked the phone. But once I opened that conversation, there was no going back. There were thousands of messages stretching back 11 months. Photos together in hotel rooms, romantic voice notes, secret jokes about me, dinner reservations at the same restaurant where Daniel had celebrated our anniversary only weeks earlier. I stood there frozen, feeling my entire life collapse silently around me. But instead of screaming, instead of confronting him, I calmly placed the phone back exactly where it had been. Then I walked downstairs and set the dinner table for 3. Because in less than 20 minutes, my best friend was coming over for dinner, and neither of them had any idea that their secret was already dead. That dinner was the hardest performance of my life. Christy walked through my front door smiling, hugged me tightly, and told me I looked beautiful. Daniel poured wine like everything was normal, and I sat across from both of them for almost 2 hours, listening carefully while they lied directly to my face. Every laugh sounded fake now. Every touch between us felt poisoned. I watched Daniel talk too much because he was nervous. I watched Christy avoid eye contact whenever I mentioned marriage or loyalty. And somehow, while they thought they were fooling me, I became calmer than I had ever been in my entire life. That night, lying beside my sleeping husband, I made myself a promise. I would not destroy myself emotionally just to give them a dramatic scene. I would think clearly. I would protect myself first. And when the truth finally came out, I would make sure I walked away with my dignity, my future, and my peace intact. So while they continued their affair thinking I knew nothing, I quietly hired a divorce attorney, gathered financial records, copied hidden hotel receipts from our shared computer, and discovered my husband had secretly spent almost $19,000 during those 11 months. Every day, I smiled at breakfast while building the case that would eventually destroy the fantasy they had created together. As weeks passed, both of them started sensing something had changed. Christy suddenly became overly concerned about me, calling just to check in, fishing carefully to see whether I had discovered the truth. Daniel started acting extra loving, bringing home dinner, touching my shoulder gently in the kitchen, trying desperately to ease his own guilt. But by then, I had already stopped seeing them as my husband and best friend. I saw them as 2 people trying to protect themselves. The moment everything truly shifted came when my lawyer froze our accounts after Daniel secretly tried moving money behind my back. That was when panic finally hit him. He realized I wasn't going to cry, forgive, and quietly disappear. Then, one Saturday afternoon, Daniel and Christy showed up at my house together. They sat across from me on the back porch, pretending they wanted to handle things like adults. They begged me not to continue legal action because it would ruin everyone's lives. But what they really meant was they were terrified of consequences. Terrified their families, careers, and social circles would finally see who they truly were. I remember looking directly at Christy, the woman who once held my hand after my miscarriage, and feeling absolutely nothing except clarity. She told me I was making a mistake. I looked her in the eyes and calmly replied, "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." The courtroom depositions months later felt less like revenge and more like truth finally stepping into daylight. Under questioning, Daniel admitted to the secret hotel meetings, the hidden email account, and the affair he had spent nearly a year denying through his actions. Christy tried to avoid answering questions at first, but eventually even she broke under the weight of the evidence. And sitting there watching both of them forced to speak honestly for the first time, I realized something important. I didn't need them to suffer in order to heal. I just needed the truth to stop hiding. The divorce was finalized shortly before Christmas. I kept the house, my financial security, and most importantly, myself. Daniel eventually left the state after his reputation quietly collapsed. Christy lost clients, friendships, and the carefully built image she had spent years protecting. Their relationship didn't survive either. But the most surprising part of all this wasn't their downfall. It was my rebirth. I painted the walls colors Daniel always hated. I planted a garden in the backyard. I started sleeping peacefully again. I laughed without forcing it. And one morning, months later, while drinking coffee alone in complete silence, I realized something that changed everything. They hadn't ruined my life. They had exposed the people they truly were, and forced me to finally become the woman I was always meant to be. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it introduces you to your real strength. For the first few weeks after the divorce papers were filed, the house felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by memories. Every room carried evidence of a life I had once trusted completely. The kitchen where Daniel used to dance badly while making pancakes on Sunday mornings. The couch where Christy and I had stayed up until 2 a.m. drinking wine and talking about our futures. The guest bathroom floor where I had sat crying after discovering the messages. It was strange how quickly familiar spaces could become crime scenes in your mind. Sometimes I would walk into a room and suddenly remember a specific lie, a specific night, a specific smile that I now understood had been fake. But instead of running from those memories, I forced myself to sit with them. Because I realized healing wasn't pretending none of it happened. Healing was learning how to exist without letting those memories control me anymore. Daniel tried contacting me constantly during that period. At first, the messages sounded practical, questions about paperwork, bills, furniture, insurance. Then, slowly, they became emotional. He texted things like, "I miss talking to you," and "I never wanted things to end like this." One night around midnight, he sent a message that simply said, "You were my best friend." I stared at the screen for a long time after reading it. The irony was almost unbearable, because while he was sleeping with my best friend, I had still been defending him to people, still believing in him, still building a future around someone who was secretly destroying ours. I never replied. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood something important. Closure doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes closure comes from silence, from refusing to reopen doors that nearly destroyed you the first time. Christy, on the other hand, approached things differently. About a month after the depositions, she sent me a 6-page email. 6 full pages explaining how complicated everything had become between her and Daniel. She wrote about loneliness, emotional confusion, unresolved feelings, and how the affair had just happened slowly, as if betrayal was some kind of weather event no one could control. She said she had loved me like a sister, said losing me was the greatest pain of her life. But what struck me most was what the letter never actually contained: accountability. At no point did she fully admit that every secret meeting, every deleted message, every lie told directly to my face had been a choice. Instead, she wrote like she was another victim of the situation. I finished reading it at my kitchen counter, then quietly deleted the email without responding. Some apologies are only attempts to reduce guilt. I was no longer interested in helping either of them feel better about what they had done. Winter passed slowly, but spring arrived like a second chance. The garden I planted in the backyard began growing faster than expected. Tiny green tomatoes appeared first, then basil, lavender, and roses climbing along the fence line. Dr. Price once told me healing often shows up physically before it shows up emotionally. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. Then one Saturday morning, I realized I had spent almost 3 hours gardening without thinking about Daniel or Christy once. That was the first real sign I was recovering. Not when the court ruled in my favor, not when people finally learned the truth, but when my mind stopped revolving around the betrayal every second of the day. Pain loses power quietly, almost invisibly. One day you wake up and realize the wound is no longer the center of your life. Around that same time, I grew unexpectedly close to my elderly neighbor Frances. She had lived across the street for decades with her husband before he passed away 2 years earlier. Every Tuesday morning we started having coffee together on her porch. She never pushed for details, never treated me like a tragic story. She simply listened when I needed to talk and stayed silent when I didn't. One morning I finally asked her something that had been sitting heavy in my chest for months. How do you trust people again after something like this? Frances smiled softly and stirred cream into her coffee before answering. You don't trust people because they promise they won't hurt you, she said. You trust yourself to survive if they do. That sentence changed something inside me. Because the truth was, I had spent my whole life believing safety came from other people's loyalty, but real safety came from knowing I could rebuild even after devastation. By early summer I had started feeling like myself again, except stronger, quieter, less desperate for approval. Work was thriving. My project at the firm had become one of the company's biggest successes that year, and for the first time in a long time, I was imagining a future that belonged entirely to me. Then one afternoon at the public library, I met Marcus. We both reached for the same book at the same moment and laughed awkwardly. He was kind in a way that felt effortless, not performative. There were no games, no confusion, no emotional guessing. After years of walking on emotional glass without realizing it, his calmness felt unfamiliar at first. We started slowly, coffee dates, walks through weekend markets, conversations about books, family, music, ordinary things, and maybe that was what made it beautiful. After surviving betrayal that felt dramatic enough to destroy my life, peace suddenly became the most attractive thing in the world. The strange part is, people expected me to become bitter after everything that happened. Some even seemed disappointed that I wasn't publicly angry all the time. But bitterness is exhausting. Eventually I realized carrying hatred for Daniel and Christy would only keep them emotionally present in a life they no longer deserved access to. So I let them go. Not because they earned forgiveness, but because I deserved freedom. Last I heard, Daniel was still in Charlotte working a smaller position than the one he lost in Atlanta. Christy had moved to a tiny agency after quietly leaving her old job. Their relationship ended less than a year after the divorce finalized. Apparently, once secrecy disappeared, so did the fantasy. That didn't surprise me. Affairs survive on illusion. Real life eventually demands character. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not screaming that night when I discovered the messages. If I regret staying calm instead of throwing his phone against the wall or exposing them publicly immediately. And honestly, no. Because that silence saved me. In those first moments of betrayal, emotions beg you to destroy yourself trying to hurt the people who hurt you. But calmness gave me power. Patience protected my future, and dignity became the one thing they could never take from me. Looking back now, I understand something I wish every betrayed person knew. Your life does not end when someone fails to love you correctly. Sometimes that moment is actually the beginning of becoming who you were supposed to be all along. A year after everything ended, I hosted dinner at my house again. The same dining room, the same wooden table, the same soft yellow lights above the kitchen island. But this time, the air felt different. Peaceful, honest. Mine. Amanda was there laughing loudly over a story from Phoenix. Francis brought homemade pie. Marcus stood beside me in the kitchen pretending he knew how to open a wine bottle properly while Biscuit followed everyone around hoping for food to fall from the table. And at one point during the night, I looked around the room and realized something that almost made me emotional. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe inside my own life. Later that evening, after everyone left, I stood alone in the backyard beside the garden I had planted after the divorce. The roses had bloomed fully by then. The terracotta walls inside the house glowed softly through the windows, warm and alive. And suddenly I remembered that night all over again. Standing in my bedroom, holding Daniel's phone, staring at those 2,000 messages while my entire world silently cracked apart. Back then, I thought I was losing everything. My marriage, my best friend, my future. But standing there now, listening to the quiet summer wind move through the garden, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't lost my life that night. I had lost the illusion of it. Because real love does not require betrayal to survive. Real friendship does not exist only when it's convenient. And loyalty is not something people speak about. It's something they prove when no one is watching. Daniel and Christy didn't destroy me. They revealed themselves. And once the truth came into the light, I finally had the chance to rebuild my life around people who knew how to love without lying. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to remember, it's this. When someone betrays you, Do not destroy yourself trying to understand why. Some people will risk everything good in their lives for temporary excitement, selfishness, attention, or ego. That failure belongs to them, not you. Your job is not to beg for honesty from dishonest people. Your job is to protect your peace, protect your future, and walk away with your dignity still intact. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this: the people who hurt you most are often the people who had the closest access to your heart. But that doesn't mean you stop loving. It doesn't mean you stop trusting forever. It simply means you become wiser about who earns access to you next time. That night, when I quietly set the table for 3 after discovering the affair, I thought I was preparing for the worst dinner of my life. I didn't realize I was actually preparing for the first day of my freedom. So if you're listening to this while your own heart is breaking, hear me carefully. You are not ruined because someone betrayed you. You are not weak because you trusted deeply. And you are not losing when people walk away from the life you built with honesty. Sometimes the universe removes people from your story because they no longer deserve a front row seat to your future. And one day when the pain finally quiets, you'll sit in a peaceful home surrounded by honest love and realize something beautiful: the ending you cried over was actually the beginning that saved you.